A narcissist never truly leaves. He might disappear for a week, a month, or even a year, but almost always, he comes back. Sometimes it's quiet, like a short late-night message. "Hey, how are you?" Other times it's loud, phone calls, unexpected visits, or dramatic declarations. Even when you've drawn a clear line, even when it feels like it's finally over, he reappears, like a shadow that refuses to let go. And in that moment, many people ask the same question: why? Why do narcissists always return, even when the relationship seems finished? Carl Jung wrote that a person who never faces their shadow is doomed to repeat the same patterns over and over again. For the narcissist, that shadow is made of emptiness, the fear of losing control, and the inability to exist without constant proof of their power. That's why they never leave for good. Even if they walk away physically, inside they hold on to a hook. I can always come back, and it will all start again. Picture an actor stepping off the stage after a performance. For the audience, the show is over. But for the actor, the role still lives inside. He can't let it go. The same is true for the narcissist. Even after the breakup, he continues to feel that the stage is still his, and that you remain part of his audience. And so, he shows up again. Sometimes with promises of change, sometimes with reproaches or accusations, and sometimes with a casual message, pretending to come back just as a friend. But the real reason is always the same. He cannot release his grip on control. He doesn't know how to live without it. And that is why a narcissist's return is never an accident. It is a pattern, a predictable cycle that must be recognized for what it is. First of all, the narcissist needs control. For the narcissist, relationships were never about equality. For them, relationships are a stage for power. Where another person seeks closeness, trust, and mutual support, the narcissist seeks domination. Their goal is not to build a partnership, but to secure control. To make sure they are the ones setting the rules of the game. That's why a breakup is not seen by them as a natural ending. It's felt as a personal defeat. When you walk away or stop responding, the narcissist feels as if their most valuable resource has been taken from them: the ability to control you. To them, this isn't just the loss of a relationship. It's a blow to the very framework of their inner world. They cannot accept the idea that someone has managed to escape their grip. So the return becomes a kind of test. The message is always the same, no matter how it's delivered. Can I still control you? Will the same tactics that worked before work again? Sometimes it shows up as a tender letter full of apologies. Sometimes it comes as a reproach or even a threat, but the core remains unchanged, to check whether their power still holds. Take an example from a personal relationship. A woman decides to leave after years of emotional pressure. She blocks the narcissist, changes her routines, and begins to rebuild her life. But after some time, he reappears with the familiar line, "I've changed." Let's give it another try. If she agrees, the cycle quickly resets. The same manipulations, the same attempts to dominate. His return isn't about love. It's about power. Or picture the workplace. A narcissistic boss who once lost an employee might resurface months or even years later with an exciting opportunity. On the surface, it looks like appreciation of the person's skills. But in reality, the aim is not professional respect. It's about reclaiming someone to control. He isn't looking for a colleague. He's looking for a subject. Carl Jung wrote that a person's shadow shows itself in the very things they deny in themselves. The narcissist denies their own vulnerability and dependence on others, and so they mask it with control. The more terrified they are of losing their sense of self, the harder they cling to power over those around them. And that is why the narcissist always returns, not because of love, but because they cannot bear the thought of their own powerlessness. Secondly, the narcissist is dependent on resources. For the narcissist, relationships are never built on equality or true reciprocity. To them, the other person is a source of supply. And by resources, we don't just mean material things like money or status. More often, it's the immaterial ones. Your emotions, your attention, your care, your support, even your energy. All of it becomes fuel. Without that fuel, their ego starts to crumble. The narcissist is used to living off these resources. Your emotions, whether anger, sadness, tears, or even joy, become their nourishment. It doesn't really matter to them whether those emotions are positive or negative. What matters is the flow. As long as you react, you confirm their significance. You show them they still have the power to influence your inner world. Take an example from a personal relationship. A narcissistic partner storms out after an argument, slams the door, and disappears. Days later, a message appears on your phone. "I miss you." At first glance, it might look like reconciliation. But in reality, it's a test. Will you give me attention again? Will you start feeding me again? Even the smallest step, whether you reply or ignore it, already gives them something to feed on. In that moment, they feel control again. The same thing happens in the workplace. A narcissistic colleague may vanish after being criticized or challenged, only to reappear later, asking questions, suggesting projects, finding ways to pull you back in. What matters is regaining access to your attention and involvement. Without it, they feel forgotten, irrelevant, as if deprived of oxygen. Carl Jung wrote that a person without a strong inner core looks for confirmation outside themselves. The narcissist lives entirely within this dependency. When cut off from your emotions, your care, your attention, they experience something like withdrawal. Anxiety creeps in, emptiness takes over, and the fear of dissolving becomes overwhelming. And so they return, not out of love, not out of any genuine desire to change, but to reconnect to the source and feed their fragile ego again. This is why the narcissist's return is almost inevitable. They come back to wherever they believe fuel is still available. It might be your anger, your explanations, your money, or even your silent presence. All of it, for them, is resource. And this is why they cling so tightly, circling back again and again, trying to re-enter your life. Thirdly, the narcissist lives under the illusion of ownership. One of the most destructive features of the narcissist's mindset is the deep conviction that the people around them belong to them. They may not always say it outright, but inside they truly feel a sense of entitlement over a partner, a friend, or even a colleague. Your emotions, your time, your attention, all of it is seen as their territory. That's why your decision to walk away is never perceived as your choice. For most people, the end of a relationship, while painful, is still understood as a conscious decision. Two people can talk, say goodbye, and move on. But for the narcissist, it looks entirely different. Your leaving isn't about you. It's an attack on their power. In their mind, it's almost an insult. How dare you leave me? I'm the one who decides when this is over. In personal relationships, this illusion of ownership becomes especially clear. Imagine a narcissistic partner who is used to controlling everything, when you meet, how you spend your time, even who you speak with. But then you decide to end it. That's when the most painful reaction begins. You may hear things like, "You're not going anywhere. We're not done." Or they may keep coming back again and again, as if your departure is just a temporary pause, never a final decision. To them, you are not an independent person with your own choices. You are part of their property, something they refuse to lose. In social settings, the same logic applies. Picture a narcissistic colleague who thrives on being the center of attention, expecting everyone to listen and nod along. But then someone chooses to step back, refusing to play along anymore. For the narcissist, this isn't just a personal choice. It's a challenge. How dare you turn away from me? I'll prove you'll come back for my approval. Carl Jung wrote that the persona, the social mask we present to the world, often hides an inner emptiness. For the narcissist, this mask includes not only the image of confidence and superiority, but also the illusion of control over the people they cast as part of their stage. And when someone steps off that stage, it shatters not only the performance, but the myth of their power itself. That's why the narcissist's return in these cases is never about missing you or having some profound realization. They come back because they see your departure as an insult, a violation of what they believe is their right of ownership. What matters most to them is proving to themselves, I still have control. And in pursuit of that feeling, they'll use any method available: persuasion, promises, pressure, or even dramatic scenes, all to restore the illusion that the power is still theirs. Fourthly, the narcissist turns to manipulation disguised as a new beginning. One of their favorite tactics after a breakup is to reappear with promises of change and talk of starting fresh. It might happen suddenly, after weeks or even months of silence. They arrive with familiar lines. I've figured it all out. I've changed. This time will be different. These words sound like hope, like the promise of a new chapter, the chance to finally build the kind of relationship you always wanted. But the reality is very different. It's not genuine transformation. It's a carefully crafted manipulation. In personal relationships, this scenario repeats itself over and over. After a loud argument, after your firm "never again," the narcissist may return with gifts, tender words, and dramatic declarations. You might get a long message late at night. I realize now I was wrong. You mean everything to me, and I'm ready to change. Or even hear something theatrical. I never knew how much I needed you until now. For someone exhausted from the pain and desperate for even a hint of sincerity, those words can sound like salvation. But the truth is, the moment you give in, the cycle begins again. The narcissist hasn't changed. Only the mask they wear has. The goal remains the same: to regain access to you. In professional settings, the form is different, but the purpose is the same. A narcissistic boss who's been exposed for dishonesty or harshness might suddenly shift their tone. They start smiling, praising your work, and saying things like, I've rethought my methods. Let's start over. Clean slate. On the surface, it looks like progress. In reality, it's just another way to restore influence, to convince you to trust again, and to pull you back into the old game. Carl Jung wrote that a person who refuses to face their shadow will endlessly repeat the same patterns. For the narcissist, this so-called new beginning is exactly that, a repeated script. They are not willing to acknowledge their vulnerability, their emptiness, or their mistakes. They simply disguise them with promises, using the illusion of change to pull you back into the cycle. And that cycle always plays out the same way. Promises, a honeymoon phase, the slow return of old behaviors, and eventually, disappointment all over again. Think of a pendulum swinging from side to side. Each time it swings, you hope it will finally stop in the middle. But the laws of physics don't allow it. The pendulum always comes back. That is exactly how the narcissist's new beginning works. It's not a fresh start, but just another swing back into the same destructive patterns. And that's why it's crucial to remember. When a narcissist says, I've changed, or things will be different this time, those words are not proof of transformation. They're a tool to test whether you'll step back into the same circle. And if you do, the story unfolds exactly as it did before. Carl Jung wrote that every person carries a shadow, the parts of the self we suppress, hide, and refuse to acknowledge. Weakness, envy, feelings of insignificance, fears we don't dare to say out loud. Facing this shadow is always painful, but it is also what opens the door to maturity. A person who has the courage to look inward has a chance to stop repeating the same mistakes over and over again. But the narcissist is built differently. Their persona, the outer mask of strength, charm, and control, exists only to cover up their shadow. And what lies beneath that mask is emptiness, fear of rejection, and panic at the thought that without admiration and control, they might cease to exist. That is why they keep coming back. Their shadow is not integrated, not acknowledged, and so it continues to drive them from the inside. Picture the narcissist as an actor who has been playing the same role for an entire lifetime. They walk on stage, receive applause, and feel alive. But when the performance ends, all that remains is an empty hall and silence. For most people, that's just the natural close of a show. For the narcissist, it's catastrophe. They cannot step off the stage because behind the curtain waits their shadow, the vulnerability and helplessness they refuse to face. And so, they return again and again, desperate to drown out that silence with another performance. In relationships, this is especially clear. You leave, you cut off contact, you set firm boundaries. Logically, that should be the end of the story. Yet after some time, a message appears. I miss you. I'm sorry. Let's try again. These words aren't about love, and they aren't about sincerity. They are about the shadow that is stirred inside them once more. They cannot cope with the emptiness within, so they try to fill it with you. In the workplace, the same pattern emerges. A narcissistic boss who has lost their grip on the team may suddenly reconsider and begin circling back to those who distance themselves. They act as if they've changed, softening their tone, showing more attention, pretending to have a new approach. But the true reason is simple. Without control, they are forced to face their shadow, the fear of losing significance. And once again, they search for someone to silence that fear. Jung warned that anyone unwilling to confront their shadow is doomed to repeat the same patterns. And that is exactly what happens with the narcissist. As long as they avoid facing the emptiness inside, they will return. Return to the people they believe they can pull back into the game. Because for them, it's not a choice and it's not a plan. It's the only way they know how to deal with what lies within. This is why the narcissist's return is not a sign of change, not an act of love, and not a chance for a new beginning. It is simply the expression of deep inner immaturity. Their shadow remains unacknowledged, and so the cycle begins again. The return of the narcissist is not about admitting mistakes. It's not about love, and it's certainly not a chance to build something new. It's the repetition of the same cycle, where the central theme is not attachment, but power. And that's the key to see clearly. When they come back, it's not a step toward you. It's an escape from their own emptiness. They don't return because they've realized the value of the relationship. They return because without control, without fuel, without the constant reassurance of their importance, they're forced to face the very void they've been running from all their life. Think of it as a closed loop. At first, there's the idealization, the admiration, the promises, the sense that everything will finally be different. Then comes the control, the manipulation, the devaluation. Conflict builds, and eventually, there's a disappearance. But just when it seems the cycle is over, they reappear, pulling you right back into the same spiral. It's like a theater play with the same acts. The lines may change, but the script remains exactly the same. In personal relationships, this becomes painfully clear. Someone who once belittled you, dismissed you, or used you will come back with flowers, apologies, declarations of how much you mean to them. They'll say things like, "I've realized my mistakes. I don't want to lose you. This time will be different." But if you listen closely, those words don't carry truth. They carry strategy. Because once trust is restored, the old patterns come alive again. In the workplace, the same pattern plays out in a different costume. A narcissistic boss who has lost their grip may suddenly suggest starting fresh. They may put on a smile, pretend to be more approachable, even show a display of humility. But once control returns, so do the old habits. It isn't genuine change. It's a temporary tactic to reclaim power. Carl Jung wrote that anyone who refuses to face their shadow is doomed to repeat the same patterns endlessly. And for the narcissist, this is exactly what happens. They return because they cannot cope with the emptiness and fear inside. They keep seeking you, not as a true partner, but as a mirror, one that reflects back their strength and importance. That's why the most important thing is to understand the nature of this return. It's not about love. It's not about sincere remorse. It's about power and dependency. The clearer you see this, the easier it becomes to hold your boundaries. The easier it becomes to resist the illusion that this time will be different. And the sooner you realize that the way out of the cycle is not to wait for their transformation, but to step off the stage of the play they are once again trying to perform.